The first place we're going to visit on our ghost tour of Salem is the Charter Street Cemetery. This is the old burying point. It is the oldest cemetery in Salem, dating to 1637. It is also the second oldest continually maintained cemetery in the United States. Only the Charter Street Burying Ground in Boston is older, dating to 1630. If you go down to Plymouth, they may tell you that the Standish Burying Ground is older, but the Standish Burying Ground was lost, so it doesn't count. Anywho, the Charter Street Cemetery almost certainly is a little bit older than 1637, even though there are no records before then. Because the first records that we do have of the old burying point are when a man by the name of John Howe requests permission from the city of Salem to build a windmill in the city cemetery. The windmill hasn't survived, but the cemetery has. And it also suggests that it may be a couple of years older, which gives it the off chance that it could date from the beginnings of the Salem in the 1620s. However, let me introduce you to a little bit to the cemetery. It's 1.5 acres. If anyone looking behind me has done Rain Man, you may see that there are about 550 headstones, comparable number of footstones, and less than 20 tombs. Well, that doesn't seem all that dense for 1.5 acres. However, not all the bodies buried in that cemetery are marked by headstones or tombs. There are another recorded 300. Like I mentioned, this is an old cemetery, and for first 100 years of its existence, it was the primary cemetery in Salem. And it remained in operation until the early 19th century, with the last few graves being added at the end of the 19th. The last grave dates to the 1880s. Well, there are a lot of bodies there. There are probably 4,000 or 5,000 people buried in that cemetery. Yeah, that does mean that when the last graves were dug, it wasn't a last poor Yorick experience. Maybe a skull here, maybe a femur there. Oh, did I just find a rib? Anywho, this cemetery is jam-packed. And not just with skeletons, but also with ghosts. Like I said, this is ground zero for hauntings. Now, because it's important for hauntings, and this is Salem, the most seen ghosts in this cemetery aren't actually buried here, because that is the dead of the 1692 witch trials. You may remember, 19 people were hanged, 1 person was crushed to death, and another 20 died of exposure while in prison waiting for their trial. And yes, they come and haunt this cemetery because one hanging judge is buried right in the middle of this cemetery. Yes, Judge John Hathorne. And the witch trial's dead will not let him rest in peace. On more than one occasion, people have talked about a circle of ghosts forming around the well-abused grave of Judge John Hathorne. Almost as if they're trying to call him up and remind him what people think of him. Let us remember the name Hathorne for a second. We're going to meet that name again. But besides the witchcraft dead, and yes, Judge Hathorne, there are a few other ghosts that come around. Now, this is an old cemetery, and like a good old cemetery in the eastern United States, we have our own White Lady. There's speculation as to who she is or why she roams about the cemetery. Some people are claiming that she's an Irish or an Italian immigrant who died in one of the great plagues that culled our indigent population in the late 19th century. Buried unmourned and unremembered, but that is not correct. References to the White Lady date long before the 19th century. References in the 18th and possibly even the 17th century. She could be one of the first generation. I like to think that she is the first person to have gotten a headstone here, one by the name of Dorothy Cromwell. The first generation of New England Puritans didn't believe in headstones. The tradition started in Connecticut, and I'll leave that there. It gradually picked up throughout old New England, and by 1671, when Dorothy Cromwell was buried, and yes, she was married. She's not a relative of Oliver Cromwell, but she was married to one Philip Cromwell, who probably was a distant cousin of the English dictator Oliver Cromwell. And that does seem fitting. Just coming back and seeing that the fashion that she picked up from those darn people in Yale has certainly kept on going. Hey. But let me also talk a little bit about the White Lady. She's a little bit shy. She's seen more than most ghosts, but a little bit shy. Now, if you're around the Charter Street Cemetery at midnight, which I do not advise because this is Salem, and let's be serious, Massachusetts is a little bit litigious, you might catch a glimpse of her. She's not going to come to you in the front gate and chat with you. Over in that far corner. And as soon as you can make a recognition there's something there, she'll vanish in the twinkling of an eye. You should certainly hope that she does, because it's been rumored that if she gets you in conversation, before the conversation is over, you'll be a ghost right along with her, haunting the Charter Street Cemetery. And we do have a legend that's related to that, with another ghost that likes to haunt the Charter Street Cemetery. The second ghost is a lady in an Edwardian costume in a pale blue dress, who's occasionally seen with a picnic basket and a young child. And it's forgotten as to what her name is, if she's buried here or not. And if she is, pulled some strings, and it is unmarked, because as I said, the last gravestone is 1880s. But there's a rumor. There was a young woman in 1914 was walking through the Charter Street Cemetery who saw the ghost of Giles Corey. Now, he was the man who was pressed to death during the witch trials. And later that year, she died in the Great Fire of Salem of 1914. It's rumored that when she does appear, and she usually appears on the anniversary of the fire, it's roughly where she saw the ghost of Giles Corey. Now, there are a few more ghosts, and we'll get to meet them. But before we do, I'm going to introduce you to the house that's to the right of the cemetery. The Peabody House, or the Grimshaw House.